My name is Daniel Smith, and for most of my adult life, I believed I was living the American dream. I had a beautiful wife, Emily, who was not only my life partner but also in business. Together, we built a small but thriving marketing agency that had grown from a tiny startup to a reputable firm in our city. I often found myself marveling at how far we had come, each milestone a testament to our hard work, dedication, and the unbreakable bond we shared. Emily and I met during our college years. A chance encounter in a crowded library. I was immersed in my studies when I noticed her struggling to reach a book on a high shelf. I offered to help, and when I handed her the book, our eyes met, and she flashed me a warm, infectious smile. From that moment, I was captivated. We struck up a conversation, and it wasn't long before our study sessions turned into long evenings filled with laughter, dreams, and a budding romance. From that day forward, we were inseparable. We shared the same ambitions and dreams. And our complementary skills only fueled our success. While I focused on the financial aspects and strategic planning, Emily brought creativity and innovative ideas that set us apart from our competitors. Our synergy was palpable, and I always felt grateful for the partnership we had, both personally and professionally. In those early days, we celebrated every success together, be it landing a new client or achieving a significant milestone. We would pop open a bottle of champagne and toast to our shared future, envisioning the heights we would reach. Life felt perfect. Our evenings were filled with laughter, romantic dinners, and shared dreams of what we could accomplish together. We planned vacations, discussed our future children, and designed the life we wanted to create as a family. It felt like we were invincible. But as the years went by, the pressures of running a business began to weigh heavily on us. The marketing landscape was evolving rapidly. New technologies and trends constantly reshaped the industry. Competition became fiercer, and it felt like we were always racing to keep up. What once was a source of excitement slowly morphed into an overwhelming burden. As clients became more demanding and budgets tighter, I found myself working longer hours, often at the expense of our evenings together. I would come home exhausted, mentally drained, and barely able to engage in conversation. Emily noticed the changes in me. She could see the toll the business was taking on my spirit. The spark that once ignited our shared passion seemed to flicker dimly. And I could sense a growing distance between us. We began to communicate less about our feelings and more about deadlines, invoices, and projections. I could see the concern etched on her face, but I couldn't find the words to explain the stress that consumed me. As the challenges mounted, I noticed subtle changes in Emily as well. The vibrant woman I fell in love with started to appear more stressed and withdrawn. Her laughter, once a constant melody in our home, became a rare sound. I could sense her frustration, yet the weight of my responsibilities blinded me to the depth of her struggles. I wanted to support her, to be the partner she needed, but my mind was perpetually clouded with numbers, spreadsheets, and urgent emails. It was during this tumultuous time that our business began to falter. Key clients left, and our profits dwindled. I could feel the walls closing in, and with every financial setback, I felt my grip on our future slipping away. We had invested everything into this venture, our time, our money, and most importantly, our dreams. The fear of failure was palpable, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. The strain of financial uncertainty seeped into our relationship, and the tension became almost unbearable. Arguments erupted over trivial matters. Who would pick up groceries, why the dishes were left in the sink, or why I was too exhausted to spend quality time together. Each fight felt like another brick added to the wall growing between us. I wanted to reach out to Emily, to tell her how much I needed her support, but the pressure was suffocating, and my pride held me back. In those moments of solitude, I would often reflect on how we got to this point. The vision we had for our future felt increasingly out of reach. I could see the sadness in Emily's eyes, but every time I tried to address it, I felt like I was stepping into a minefield. The idea of being vulnerable, of admitting that I was struggling, terrified me. I didn't want to let her down. As the months passed, I noticed a change in Emily that I couldn't quite place. She began to spend more time away from home, claiming she was meeting clients or attending networking events. I wanted to trust her, but the paranoia of our failing business and the increasing distance between us ignited a flicker of doubt in my mind. Was she still the same woman I fell in love with, or had the weight of our struggles pushed her away? Looking back, I realize now that it was in those dark moments that the seeds of betrayal were planted. The ideal life we once had began to crumble, not just because of our business, but because we were losing each other in the process. Little did I know that soon enough, the love I thought was unshakable would be tested in ways I never anticipated. The first hint that something was amiss in my marriage came when I noticed how much Emily had changed in the past few months. I still remember that evening when I came home late from the office, exhausted and ready to unwind. The house was quiet, and an unsettling stillness hung in the air. Usually, Emily would greet me with a warm smile, perhaps even have dinner ready, but that night, the silence felt heavy. I called out her name, but there was no response. It became a pattern. Emily was increasingly less available, both physically and emotionally. She started to stay late at the office, saying she was working on important projects or meeting clients. The little time we had together was often spent in silence, my mind consumed by work, and hers absorbed in something beyond my reach. I'd ask her about her day, hoping to reconnect, but the responses were always vague, almost rehearsed. Busy, she'd say, or nothing too exciting. I could sense that she was battling her demons, but she rarely opened up to me about what she was feeling. It was as if a barrier had been erected between us, and I felt helpless to break it down. Her laughter, once a comforting melody in our home, became a distant echo. I began to wonder if it was the weight of the business bearing down on her, or if something deeper was troubling her, something she wasn't willing to share. The lack of communication became increasingly troubling. I often found myself staring at her during dinner, searching for signs of the vibrant woman I married, but the warmth in her eyes had dulled. I would try to engage her with stories from the office, asking her opinion on clients we worked with, but she would simply nod, distracted by something on her phone or lost in thought. It was as if she was present in the body, but her mind was somewhere far away, and that frightened me. As I watched her pull away, a feeling of dread settled in my stomach. I began to worry not just about our relationship, but about her emotional well-being. I found myself pacing the floor late at night, wondering if she was overwhelmed, if she was hiding something, or if she was simply unhappy. The thought of her being unhappy tore at me. I wanted to help, to understand, but every time I tried to reach out, I was met with resistance. The tipping point came during a particularly quiet week. Emily had been distant, and one evening, she received a call while I was in the other room. I heard her voice, soft and low, as she spoke, but what struck me was how her tone changed. I could hear the hint of laughter in her voice, a sound I hadn't heard in weeks. She seemed animated and engaged, everything she had been lacking with me. I felt an uneasy knot form in my stomach. Who was on the other end of that call? That weekend, I decided to visit a local coffee shop that we used to frequent. It was a nostalgic place, filled with memories of happier times. I hoped that maybe a familiar environment would remind me of the connection we once shared. I sat at our usual table, staring out the window, lost in thought. Just then, I spotted some of our mutual friends entering. They waved and made their way over, and I welcomed the distraction. As we caught up, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. During our conversation, I found myself watching for any mention of Emily, eager to gauge what they knew. It was then that one of them, Mark, casually mentioned, "So, how's Emily? I hear she's been hanging out with Brian Williams a lot lately." The name hit me like a slap in the face. Brian Williams was a well-known and wealthy lawyer in our city. I had met him a few times at networking events, and while I had never thought much of him, the idea of Emily spending time with him sent a jolt of anxiety through me. "Yeah, she's mentioned him a few times," I replied, attempting to sound nonchalant, but my heart raced. "What do you mean, hanging out?" Mark shrugged, a smirk on his face. "You know how it is. He's connected, and with the business struggling, I figured she might be looking for advice. He's probably been a good resource for her." I nodded, but inside, a whirlwind of thoughts erupted. Was Emily seeking advice, or was it something more? Did she feel more comfortable sharing her thoughts and frustrations with Brian than with me? The fear of infidelity crept into my mind like a dark cloud, blocking out any rational thought. Have they been working on something together? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but the tremor in my words betrayed me. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Not that I know of. But you know how these things go. It's easy to develop a close bond when you're working through tough times." His words hung in the air, heavy with implications. I felt my heart race as I tried to process what he was saying. The camaraderie that had once seemed innocent now felt charged with tension. Emily and Brian, together? The thought made my stomach churn. As I walked home that evening, my mind was a chaotic mix of worry and suspicion. I replayed every interaction I had with Emily in my head, searching for signs I might have missed. Had I been blind to the changes in her? Had I overlooked something significant while I focused on our business struggles? That night, as I lay in bed beside Emily, I turned to face her, trying to read her expression in the dim light. She looked peaceful in her sleep, yet the gulf between us felt wider than ever. I yearned to bridge that divide, to reclaim the love we once had, but now, a shadow of doubt loomed over our relationship, whispering insidious questions in the dark. I wanted to believe in her, to trust her, but the fear gnawed at my insides, and I knew deep down that I needed to find out the truth, no matter the cost. As the days turned into weeks, my unease about Emily's relationship with Brian only deepened. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. The seeds of doubt I had been planting in my mind began to sprout, and every interaction with her became laced with suspicion. I knew I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. If there was any truth to the whispers I had heard, I needed to uncover the reality behind Emily's actions. The first step in my investigation was to discreetly observe her. I began to pay close attention to her daily routines, tracking when she left for work and when she returned home. I tried to maintain an air of normalcy, acting as if everything was fine. I made sure to greet her with a smile each morning, despite the storm brewing inside me. I didn't want to alert her to my growing suspicions. One evening, as Emily prepared for another late meeting, I decided to put my plan into action. I casually asked her where she was headed. "Just a quick catch-up with a few colleagues," she replied, her voice cheerful yet distant. I forced a smile and nodded, but inside, my heart raced with uncertainty. After she left, I took a moment to gather my thoughts. I had seen her leave the house a dozen times, but this time felt different. I grabbed my jacket and decided to follow her, my mind racing with questions. I took my car and drove a few blocks behind her, trying to remain inconspicuous. As I drove through the city streets, I felt a sense of desperation fueling my actions. This wasn't who I was. I had always trusted Emily implicitly, but the fear of betrayal had transformed me into someone I barely recognized. Emily drove to a trendy downtown restaurant, a place I knew Brian frequented. My heart sank as I parked a safe distance away, watching her enter. I wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all, but I remained silent, a witness to what felt like an impending heartbreak. I sat in my car, heart pounding, as I waited, grappling with the reality that I was spying on my wife. After what felt like an eternity, I saw Brian arrive, confidently striding toward the restaurant entrance. They exchanged warm greetings, and for a moment, I could see Emily laugh at something he said. A wave of nausea washed over me. How could she share laughter with him when we had been drifting apart? It felt like a betrayal in real time, and I could hardly breathe as I watched them through the window. I knew I had to gather more evidence. I couldn't confront her without solid proof, so I spent the following days scouring our home for any clues. I started with her phone, knowing that it might hold the key to understanding her relationship with Brian. I tried to convince myself that I wasn't invading her privacy, I was merely trying to protect our marriage. One afternoon, while she was in the shower, I took my chance. I grabbed her phone, feeling a mix of guilt and determination. My hands shook as I unlocked it. Thankfully, she had left it without a password. I began to sift through her messages, my heart racing with each new notification. The first few conversations were innocuous enough, mostly messages with friends and clients. But my heart sank when I stumbled upon a thread with Brian. The casual banter between them was disheartening. As I read through their exchanges, the laughter and playful teasing felt intimate, almost too familiar. They shared inside jokes that I had never heard before, and I felt a pang of jealousy that twisted in my chest. Then, I found it, a photo that made my heart drop. It was a picture of Emily, beaming with joy, taken at a picturesque park. She was sitting on a bench, the sunlight illuminating her face. But what struck me was the caption that accompanied the photo: "Another perfect day with my favorite partner." Below it, Brian had commented, "Couldn't agree more. Here's to many more adventures together." I felt my world tilt on its axis. My suspicions had been confirmed. There was more to their relationship than just business. The words "favorite partner" resonated painfully in my mind, and I fought back the tears that threatened to spill. I had never seen this side of Emily with anyone else. And the realization hit me like a freight train. I knew I couldn't confront her yet, I needed more evidence. Over the next few days, I kept my facade of normalcy while I dug deeper. I reached out to mutual friends, carefully navigating conversations to glean any information about Emily and Brian. I could feel the weight of my actions weighing heavily on me, but I was driven by a need for clarity, for answers to questions that had begun to haunt me. In one of these conversations, a friend named Lisa mentioned a recent event that had taken place, where Emily had been seen with Brian. They looked so happy together, she said, a hint of envy in her voice. I thought they were working on some project, but it seemed more like a date. The words stung. I felt a mixture of betrayal and disbelief. Was my wife truly seeing another man, and had I been too blind to see it? Each piece of evidence felt like a dagger, piercing the illusion of our happy life. The conversations with friends only fueled my determination to gather more proof. As each new revelation chipped away at the trust I had placed in Emily. Eventually, I found a more explicit confirmation of my worst fears when I discovered another series of messages between Emily and Brian, this time filled with longing and innuendos. They discussed their dreams for the future, and to my horror, the conversations were peppered with comments about being together without the constraints of work. It was like a punch to the gut, shattering the remnants of my hope. I felt like I was spiraling into an abyss of despair. I knew I had to confront Emily eventually, but how could I do it without causing irreparable damage? The very thought of losing her tore at my heart, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing her already. As I pieced together the fragments of evidence I had gathered, I felt both empowered and defeated. I was on the brink of unveiling a truth that could shatter our lives, and yet, the weight of that truth hung over me like a dark cloud. Each day felt like a countdown to an inevitable confrontation, and the thought of facing Emily with the evidence of her betrayal filled me with dread. In my quest for answers, I had opened Pandora's box, and I knew that once I confronted her, there would be no turning back. The man I had become, the doubt that had taken root in my heart, would forever alter the course of our lives. I steeled myself for the confrontation that was to come, knowing that the truth would either break us or lead us to a new beginning. The world around me felt like it was crumbling, and with each piece of evidence I uncovered, I was plunged deeper into a pit of despair. I had come to a harrowing realization: Emily wasn't just involved with Brian, she was planning to leave me for him. The weight of that knowledge crushed me, making it difficult to breathe. I had always believed that love could conquer all, but as I pieced together the fragments of her betrayal, I felt that love slipping through my fingers like sand. My heart raced as I scrolled through Emily's messages. I stumbled upon a conversation that shattered any remaining illusions I had about our marriage. They discussed flights, destinations, and starting fresh in a new city. My stomach churned as I read Emily's words: "Once we get the funding, we can finally leave everything behind. It will be like a fresh start for us." Brian replied with enthusiasm, encouraging her dreams of escaping the life we had built together. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. How could she betray me so completely? The anger and heartbreak swirled within me, and I fought against the tears that threatened to spill. I had dedicated my life to this woman, and now she was plotting to leave me, using the resources and connections I had fought so hard to provide. I was filled with a burning sense of betrayal that I had never known before. The emotional turmoil left me in a state of confusion and rage. My initial instinct was to confront her, to expose her deceit, but the thought of losing her filled me with dread. Instead, I found myself spiraling into a dark place, where revenge began to take root in my heart. I was no longer the trusting husband, I was a man scorned, desperate to reclaim my life and dignity. As I mulled over my options, a wicked plan began to form in my mind. If Emily and Brian thought they could leave me behind, I would make sure they understood the true cost of their betrayal. I started to envision a scheme that would involve them both, a deal so enticing that they would have no choice but to play along. If they wanted to run away with my wife, they would have to dance to my tune first. I began to devise a plan that would lure them into a financial trap. My business was in jeopardy, but I still had connections and resources that could help orchestrate a deal. I envisioned a large project that required both Emily's and Brian's involvement, a project that would promise great rewards but was built on shaky foundations. It was risky, but if done right, it would expose their intentions and leave them vulnerable. I needed to draw Emily and Brian in without raising suspicion. I decided to create a false sense of urgency, presenting them with an opportunity they couldn't resist. I could approach Emily, pretending to be desperate for her help with a new venture. I would pitch it as a way to save our failing business, using the very connections she had gained through Brian. The irony of it all made my stomach twist. I would be using her greed against her. I spent nights plotting the details, laying out the framework for this elaborate scheme. The deal would involve a significant amount of money. A tempting offer that would promise to resolve our financial troubles. I would suggest that we form a partnership, giving Emily and Brian the chance to invest in something that could potentially lead to a lucrative return. The stakes would be high, but I knew I could present it in a way that would captivate their ambitions. I imagined sitting across the table from them, watching as they discussed the plan with eager eyes, completely unaware of the trap I was laying. The thought of outsmarting them filled me with a sense of power that I hadn't felt in weeks. Instead of being the betrayed husband, I would become the puppet master, pulling the strings of their fate. In my mind, I crafted the perfect pitch. I would highlight the potential for growth in our business, framing it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I would emphasize how critical it was to act quickly, creating a sense of urgency that would compel them to agree. The more I thought about it, the more excited I became. I had turned my pain into a weapon, and I was ready to strike. As I prepared to approach Emily, a mixture of excitement and dread coursed through me. I knew this was a dangerous game, and if I miscalculated, it could backfire spectacularly. But the thought of Emily and Brian abandoning me was far more painful than the risk of this plan failing. I had to do this, not just for myself but for the love I once had for Emily. I needed to show her that she had underestimated me and the strength of our bond. The next day, I put my plan into action. I acted as though everything was normal, casually inviting Emily to join me for dinner at one of our favorite restaurants. As we sat across from each other, I could feel the tension in the air. I had practiced my speech over and over in my head, but now, with her sitting there looking beautiful yet distant, my heart raced. Emily, I've been thinking about our business and the challenges we've faced lately, I began, forcing a casual tone into my voice. I think we need to take some risks if we want to get back on track. I have an idea for a new venture that could turn things around for us. Her eyes perked up slightly at the mention of a new opportunity. I continued, feeding off her interest. I've been in touch with some potential investors who are looking for a partnership with someone like us. I think if we collaborate with Brian, we could create something truly remarkable. I watched her closely as she absorbed my words. A flicker of excitement crossed her face, and I could feel the tension slowly dissipating. "What kind of venture are you thinking about?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. I smiled inwardly, knowing that I was on the right track. "I don't want to get into too many details just yet, but I truly believe we could turn things around. If we play our cards right, we could secure funding that not only saves our business but puts us in a position to grow exponentially." Her interest was piqued. She leaned in, eager to hear more. "That sounds promising. What do you have in mind?" I could see the wheels turning in her head, and I felt a surge of confidence. I was slowly drawing her in, making her see the possibilities, and I was prepared to do whatever it took to keep her engaged. I outlined my plan in broad strokes, ensuring that it sounded enticing enough to captivate both her and Brian. As I spoke, I felt a mix of exhilaration and apprehension. I was leading her into a web of deception, and while the thrill of it all was intoxicating, I knew the stakes were high. I had transformed from the betrayed husband into the orchestrator of a plan that could turn the tables entirely. That evening marked a turning point, not just in my relationship with Emily, but in my life as well. I was no longer willing to be a passive victim in my own story. I was ready to reclaim my narrative, even if it meant playing a dangerous game of revenge. I could feel the darkness within me begin to fester, but I pushed it aside, focusing instead on the thrill of what lay ahead. As I left the restaurant that night, I knew I was on the brink of something monumental. I was no longer just Daniel Smith, the devoted husband. I was now a man fueled by betrayal and rage, ready to execute a plan that would change everything. The stakes were high, but I was prepared to gamble everything for a chance at redemption, and a long overdue reckoning. The day had finally arrived, and I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation coursing through my veins. I was about to present the plan I had meticulously crafted to Emily and Brian. A plan that would either seal my fate or deliver the sweet taste of revenge. I had made arrangements to meet them at a conference room in a co-working space, a neutral ground where I could maintain an air of professionalism while keeping the stakes high. As I arrived at the location, my heart raced. I straightened my tie in the reflection of the glass door, trying to project an air of confidence that I didn't quite feel. This meeting was crucial. I needed to convince them that I was serious and that the opportunity I was about to present was as golden as I claimed it to be. Emily arrived first, her expression a mixture of curiosity and excitement. "Daniel, I'm glad we could meet. Brian should be here any minute," she said, her eyes sparkling with the anticipation of something new. I couldn't help but notice how beautiful she looked, and for a moment, the weight of betrayal hung heavy in the air between us. "Thanks for coming, Emily," I replied, forcing a smile. I believed this could be the turning point for us. As I set up my laptop for the presentation, my mind raced through the details of the plan. I had rehearsed my pitch 100 times, but nothing could prepare me for the actual moment of delivering it to both of them. I glanced at the door, waiting for Brian to arrive, and when he finally walked in, my stomach knotted in anticipation. "Hey, guys. Sorry for the delay," Brian said, his tone casual as he settled into a chair. "What's this all about?" "Thanks for coming, Brian," I said, maintaining my composure. "I wanted to discuss an opportunity that I believe could benefit all of us." I cleared my throat and began the presentation, pulling up a series of slides that I had prepared to illustrate the potential of the scheme I was proposing. I framed it as a unique financial venture, one that could deliver substantial returns in a short amount of time. What I'm suggesting is a high-stakes investment opportunity in a tech startup that has the potential to explode in the market, I explained, my voice steady as I laid out the details. Emily leaned forward, her interest piqued. "What kind of investment are we talking about?" she asked, her brow furrowing with curiosity. "It's a bit unconventional," I continued, "but it involves acquiring undervalued shares and leveraging our collective networks to drive up their value. We would act as strategic partners, and given your connections, Emily, and yours, Brian, I believe we can secure a significant advantage." As I spoke, I watched their reactions closely. Emily's eyes lit up with the prospect of quick money, while Brian seemed intrigued but cautious. "What's the catch?" Brian asked, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed. "You know these things can be risky." I seized the moment, feigning sincerity as I replied, "Every investment carries risk, but this one is different. We have insider knowledge about the market shift that will happen in a few months. If we act quickly, we can position ourselves to reap the benefits before others catch on." I presented the figures, illustrating how a relatively small initial investment could yield enormous profits within a short time frame. I could see Emily's excitement building as I painted a picture of financial freedom and success. "Imagine what we could do with this money: fund our dreams, escape the burdens of our current situation," I urged, playing on her desire to escape. Brian was still skeptical, and I knew I needed to address his concerns. "I understand this sounds aggressive, but sometimes you have to take calculated risks to achieve extraordinary results," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "With our combined resources and networks, we can make this work." Emily nodded, clearly captivated by the idea. "If we can get in early, the potential is huge," she said, her voice filled with enthusiasm. "I've seen how quickly tech startups can take off. We could be sitting on a goldmine." I could see the shift in her demeanor, the way she was starting to see this as her ticket to a brighter future with Brian. It was both exhilarating and excruciating to watch, knowing the truth behind my intentions. I was leading her into a trap, and every enthusiastic nod she gave only reinforced my resolve. Brian finally relented, though his expression remained cautious. "Okay, let's say we agree to this. What's the initial investment you're proposing?" I had anticipated this question and was prepared with an answer. "I suggest we start with a pool of $100,000, split evenly between the three of us. It's a substantial commitment, but with the right approach, we can multiply that within months." Emily's eyes sparkled at the mention of the figure. I could see the gears turning in her head, envisioning the possibilities. "I can pull together my savings and some additional funds," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. Brian seemed more reluctant, still weighing the pros and cons. "It's a lot of money to gamble on something unproven," he cautioned, but I sensed Emily's enthusiasm swaying him. "Trust me, Brian, we've got this. We can leverage our skills to make this work," I encouraged, leaning into my role as the persuasive partner. "We'll be in control every step of the way. Just think about the potential outcomes. The discussion continued, and as I listened to Emily and Brian weigh their options, I felt a sense of satisfaction growing within me. I was no longer just a victim of betrayal. I was orchestrating a plan that would ensnare them both in a web of their own making. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Brian nodded. "All right, let's do it. If we're going to go in, we might as well go all in." Emily beamed at the confirmation, and a wave of triumph washed over me. I had successfully planted the seeds of deception, and now I had them both right where I wanted them. The thrill of the moment made my heart race, but I quickly reminded myself of the stakes. This was only the beginning, and the real game was just unfolding. As we wrapped up the meeting, Emily looked at me with admiration. "I can't believe we're doing this. This could change everything for us," she said, and I felt a pang of guilt mixed with satisfaction. I was using her ambition against her, turning her desires into a weapon. I left the meeting with a mix of emotions swirling within me. The plan was in motion, and while the prospect of revenge thrilled me, I also recognized the dark path I was treading. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line, but I pushed those thoughts aside. I was in control now, and there was no turning back. With each passing day, the stakes would rise, and I was ready to see this through to the end. I would not only reclaim what was rightfully mine but also show Emily and Brian the consequences of underestimating me. The game was on, and I was prepared to win at any cost. The atmosphere in the conference room was thick with tension as I watched Emily and Brian sift through the mountain of documents I had presented to them. It had been weeks since we entered into our ill-fated financial venture, and I could sense that the once promising glow of hope had dimmed into a flickering uncertainty. I felt a mix of anticipation and apprehension coursing through me. The climax of my plan was drawing near, and I was about to witness the fruits of my orchestrated deception. As they scoured through spreadsheets, financial projections, and risk assessments, I took a moment to relish the sight before me. Emily's brow was furrowed in concentration, and Brian was leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, a telltale sign that his confidence was waning. I had spent weeks planting doubts in their minds, twisting the narrative to highlight potential gains while conveniently glossing over the inherent risks. Now, as the walls began to close in on them, I couldn't help but feel a rush of exhilaration. "Daniel," Emily finally said, her voice tinged with anxiety, "these projections don't look as promising as we initially thought. Are you sure about this?" I feigned concern, putting on an act as though I were as blindsided as they were. "I know it seems daunting, but the market fluctuates. We've invested in something groundbreaking, it just needs time to mature." "Time is something we don't have," Brian interjected, his tone sharp. "We've put a significant amount of money into this, and it's disappearing faster than we anticipated. I've been looking over our investments, and it doesn't look good." I watched as their despair deepened. A part of me felt guilty for leading them into this pit, but the larger part reveled in their misfortune. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the culmination of all my carefully laid plans. The betrayal they had initiated was now coming back to haunt them, and I was the silent observer, savoring their turmoil from the sidelines. Over the next few days, the situation deteriorated rapidly. I witnessed Emily's excitement turn to frustration and panic as she tried to make sense of our disastrous financial maneuverings. I would catch her glancing at her phone, her face twisting in distress as she received calls from worried investors and financial advisors. Brian was becoming increasingly agitated, pacing their apartment and throwing out ideas that seemed to lead nowhere. One afternoon, I decided to visit their place under the guise of concern. As I knocked on the door, I felt a thrill of anticipation. I wanted to witness the devastation firsthand, to see how they were coping with the mess I had helped create. When Emily opened the door, her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, evidence of sleepless nights and endless worry. "Daniel, I'm glad you're here," she said, her voice shaky. "We need to talk. This isn't going as we planned." I nodded, my heart racing. "I know things look tough right now, but we can still turn it around. We just need to reassess our strategy." But as we settled into the living room, I could sense the desperation in the air. Brian soon joined us, his expression tight with frustration. "We're in over our heads, Daniel. This was supposed to be a sure thing. Now, it feels like we're sinking fast." The two of them began to unravel their fears, and I took the opportunity to keep feeding their doubts. "Perhaps we underestimated the risks," I said, my voice soothing yet authoritative. "But let's not forget the potential gains. We can salvage this. The next few days felt like a whirlwind of chaos. Emily was trying to reach out to financial advisors, hoping for a miracle, while Brian was diving deeper into the numbers, trying to find a way to salvage what was left of their investment. Each passing moment was like a countdown, and I could feel the inevitability of their downfall hanging over us like a storm cloud. Finally, the inevitable happened. I received a text from one of my contacts, someone who had insider knowledge about the market. The startup we had invested in was folding, and all investments would be lost. I felt a rush of exhilaration as I read the message. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I decided to pay them another visit, eager to witness the fallout firsthand. As I walked through the door, I could immediately sense the palpable tension in the room. Emily was on the phone, her voice rising in panic, and Brian was frantically typing on his laptop, desperately seeking any shred of hope. "Daniel," Emily exclaimed as she hung up. "We've just heard that the company is shutting down. We're losing everything." A triumphant smile tugged at the corners of my lips, but I masked it with feigned shock. "What? No, that's impossible. We did our due diligence." Brian slammed his laptop shut, his face flushed with anger. "Due diligence? You promised us this was a solid investment. How could you lead us into this mess?" I leaned back in my chair, allowing their accusations to wash over me. "I never intended for this to happen. I believed in the potential of the company just as much as you did." Emily's expression shifted from panic to disbelief, and I could see the betrayal slowly dawning on her. "But you knew about the risks, didn't you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You knew this could happen, and you still went along with it." The words hung heavy in the air, and I felt a surge of satisfaction at the realization that my plan was finally unfolding as I had envisioned. I didn't anticipate the market shifting so quickly. "It's devastating for all of us, but we can still regroup," I said, my voice steady, even as the glee bubbled beneath the surface. As they continued to unravel, I watched with a sense of triumph. Their despair was a bittersweet symphony, a melody of regret and loss that I reveled in. I had turned the tables, and now they were the ones facing the consequences of their choices. Emily, once the shining light of my life, was now a figure of defeat. And I relished every moment of her downfall. Days passed, and the weight of their losses bore down on them. Emily became increasingly withdrawn, her once vibrant spirit extinguished. Brian, once full of confidence, now looked like a shell of the man he used to be, grappling with the harsh reality of their situation. I would visit occasionally, feigning support, but inside, I was filled with a dark satisfaction. "Daniel," Emily finally said one evening, her voice barely a whisper, "we've lost everything. I trusted you, and now I don't know what to do." I allowed a moment of silence to pass before responding, my heart swelling with a twisted sense of victory. "I know this is tough, but it's not over yet. We can rebuild. It just might take time." As they spiraled deeper into despair, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. I had succeeded in my revenge, I had exposed the depth of their greed and ambition, and now they were facing the bitter reality of their choices. Emily, who once sought to escape me, was now trapped in a prison of her own making, left to confront the consequences of her betrayal. Each day brought more heartache for them, and while I put on a facade of sympathy, I reveled in their anguish from behind the mask. They had underestimated me, and now, as I watched their lives unravel, I knew I had finally reclaimed my power. The climax of this twisted tale was not just their financial ruin, it was the emotional wreckage that followed. Emily had lost everything she thought she wanted, and as the pieces of their lives lay scattered around them, I stood tall, triumphant, and resolute in my newfound sense of control. The tables had turned, and I had become the architect of their demise. In the weeks following the financial collapse, I watched as Emily's world crumbled around her. Once a vibrant and ambitious woman, she now found herself isolated, stripped of not only her financial security but also her sense of identity. The vibrant life we once shared felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the cold reality of betrayal and desperation. Emily moved through life like a ghost, her days spent in a haze of anxiety and regret. She had lost all her savings and, with them, her connections to the high society she had coveted. Friends who once flocked to her side had vanished, unwilling to associate with someone who had fallen so far. I could see the toll it was taking on her. Her eyes were sunken, her hair unkempt, and her spirit was broken. I observed her from a distance, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of me felt a deep satisfaction. She had been driven by greed and ambition, willing to cast aside our life for a fleeting chance at wealth. But another part of me was struck by the stark reality of her situation. She had lost everything, not just money, but the relationships and connections that had defined her. As I drove past her apartment, I saw her sitting alone on the balcony, staring blankly into the distance. The laughter and joy we once shared had been replaced by an oppressive silence. It was a poignant reminder of how far she had fallen, and I couldn't shake the feeling that her isolation was a fitting consequence of her choices. In my heart, I knew that she had sacrificed everything for the sake of greed, and it was a bitter pill to swallow. Emily had traded our life for an illusion of grandeur. And now that illusion lay shattered at her feet. As time passed, the truth about the financial disaster began to surface. Emily, in her isolation, became desperate to find answers. She started reaching out to old contacts, trying to piece together what had happened and who had orchestrated their downfall. Through hushed conversations and whispered rumors, it became clear that the very network of connections she had pursued, those same powerful figures she thought would elevate her, had played a part in their demise. It was a calculated trap, set to ensnare those who were too greedy to see the warning signs. One evening, Emily approached me, her eyes glistening with a mix of fear and anger. "Daniel, I found out something crucial," she said, her voice trembling. "It wasn't just a bad investment. There were whispers that someone had deliberately misled us, manipulated the figures and played us against each other. It all points back to Brian. He set this in motion." The realization struck her like a cold wave, and I could see the panic rising within her. Emily had trusted Brian, thinking he was a way out of her problems, but he had been the architect of their ruin, exploiting her ambitions for his gain. The weight of this revelation hung heavily in the air. Emily felt the full force of her isolation, understanding that the very person she had turned to for help had betrayed her trust most profoundly. It wasn't just about her own choices anymore, it was a reminder of how easily trust could be manipulated. How ambition could blind someone to the true motives of those around them. She sank deeper into despair, realizing that her pursuit of wealth had led her straight into a trap, designed by someone who had feigned loyalty while plotting her downfall. As I reflected on the tumultuous events that had unfolded, I felt a strange sense of clarity. My life had changed dramatically, and while I had emerged with my business intact, the cost had been profound. I had lost not only my wife but also the trust that once defined our relationship. Looking back, I realized that the experience had taught me invaluable lessons about the fragility of trust and the importance of genuine connections. Emily's ambition blinded her to the values that truly mattered, and I was left with the haunting realization that betrayal can come from those we least expect. Despite the pain and loss, I felt a flicker of hope. I had weathered the storm and emerged stronger, wiser, and more resolute in my commitment to my business and myself. I understood that true fulfillment lies not in wealth or status, but in the integrity of our relationships and the choices we make. As I stood at the precipice of a new beginning, I knew that I would tread carefully. I had learned to cherish what truly mattered and to guard against the temptations of greed and betrayal. While the scars of my experience would linger, I was determined to move forward, wiser and more grounded, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead.